Hello, today we're going to talk about Chapter 2, Organizing Economies. We're going to talk about the fundamental economic questions, and this will be a continuation of what we learned in the previous class. The fundamental economic questions are what shall be produced, how they shall be produced, and for whom shall they be produced. What do these questions mean? What shall be produced basically is the question of okay, what are we going to make as a country? What are we going to make as an economy? Are we going to make more tables? Are we going to make more chairs? Are we going to make more cars? Are we going to make more trains? Are we going to make more clothes? What are we going to be making? How shall they be produced? Will we be using a lot of people to make them? Will we be using a lot of machines to make them? Remember, we talked about the four economic factors: land, labor, capital, production. Are we going to be using a lot of capital? Are we going to be using a lot of labor? Those are some of the questions that are being considered. And the last question is for whom shall they be produced? Because once we have produced these things, we need to have a way to allocate going to have a way in which we're going to allocate who gets these kinds of things, right? So let's say we have 100 cars. Who gets this 100 cars? If there are 100 people in the country, does everyone get one car? Or is there like a system of wealth, like whoever has more money gets to have more of these cars, something which we do see in the world that we live in right now, right? Then the next question arguably would be, then how do we answer these questions? The way these questions have been answered historically is that countries around the world have chosen to organize themselves into different kinds of economies to kind of answer these questions. The four major kinds of economies that countries have organized themselves into historically are a command economy, a market economy, a mixed economy, and a traditional economy. Let's look into how these kinds of economies try to answer the different questions. A command economy is one in which most of the decisions in an attempt to answer these questions is done by the government or some sort of central planner. The government decides what shall be produced, they decide how these things shall be produced, and they decide for whom shall they be produced. There is a high degree of government intervention, and most production tends to happen by state-owned firms or companies, which basically means that all businesses are owned by the government, almost all businesses. There aren't many examples of purely command economies in the economy right now, but oftentimes, like China and Russia at a certain point, were fully command economies where more the government usually had most influence over most decisions. There is usually very little private enterprise, which means that there isn't a lot of capitalism as we know it right now. Most decisions do tend to be taken by the government. The opposite of command economy is the market economy, where the government has very little control, where consumers and producers, as we learned in the previous lessons, set the prices and answer the economic questions through a price mechanism. Consumer choice and freedoms are possibly the most important. That means that what we want to buy and what we want to do with our freedom to spend money is what often answers the question what shall be produced, how shall be produced, and for whom shall they be produced. What shall be produced is dependent on what we want to be produced because oftentimes we will have money to indicate through this idea that we call signaling to the corporations, to the firms, that this is what they want, how shall we produce. It's oftentimes we have some kind of say over that, and for whom shall they be produced? It shall often be produced for the people with the most money. However, there is a possibility of monopolies arising in market economy, but that's also a possibility command economies and whatnot. But we're going to move on to the third kind of economy, and some examples of pure market economies are probably the United States 100 years ago. Right now, it is more of a mixed economy. No countries are purely command or market. Most economies are mixed because there's some sort of government intervention and some sort of private agency and some sort of consumer choice in most economies. And that's what we get to next, right? There's some government intervention and planning involved in mixed economies. But consumers, producers, and the government all have some say. And as the name suggests, it's a mix between a command and a market economy. And this is the most predominant kind of economy in the world right now. It's the most popular, it's the most frequent. Most countries have realized that the mixed economy is perhaps the right balance in terms of finding like some having some sort of government intervention when it comes to important things like water services or electricity. They want those things to be owned by the public sector, whereas they also want some kind of government like free agency and freedom for us human beings so that we can make the kinds of decisions we want. And the last kind of economy is a traditional economy, which is generally different from mixed command or market. It's like a general type of economy that's increasingly rare in the modern world. And I know I said that mix and command is also rare, but when we talk about traditional economy, we talk about rare in the sense that oftentimes we're talking about hunter-gatherer societies or tribal groups living in different places who have very different economic systems, who often do things like bartering. Bartering basically means you trade goods. There is no monetary system, there is no money involved. You give one good to someone and they give you one good back. That's called bartering. And they have a very traditional way of organizing things. They're hunter-gatherer societies, they're tribal groups, and it's a way of organizing economies like it has been done historically, as opposed to doing it by trying to answer the fundamental economic questions. They care less about the fundamental economic questions directly, and they care more about just organizing the way things have been doing. So there have been we're going to look at some problem solving, but we're going to do that in the next video. But the four kinds of major economies are command, market, mixed, and traditional economy, and they answer the fundamental economic questions of what shall be produced, how they shall be produced, and for whom they shall be produced.